We begin our last chapter. We're going to study in elements of music. This chapter is chapter 13, and it is music of the 20th century. Now, 20th century classical music is very, very broad in its base, and there's a lot of it that is very much just an extension of the composers you've already studied. That music we aren't going to take much time in looking at because really you've already studied it. So some of the stuff you're about to listen to is really weird, for lack of a better term. But I want you to understand that not all 20th century music is going to be strange just because it was written at that time. Pretty much any time you go through history, music, art, anything that's artistic, you'll find that the way that popularity of the arts cycle. For example, if we go back to the classic period, the classic period was about doing things perfect, was about technical perfection, was about the compositions being perfect. Everything was just about perfection. So the Romantic era, we wanted to keep the technical aspect, but suddenly it became a little bit more personal. So you still had very, very complex and standard type music, but with more of an emotional content. Well, now comes the 20th century, and it's all about trying to create a more individual sound and getting away from anything that was normal in the past. You are going to hear some stuff that really, quite honestly, for lack of a better way of saying it, it sounds pretty awful. But it's unique. It's something else to study, and there are people who really love pretty much all of the items that we're going to study. You will find there are some you probably find interesting, some you strongly dislike, and we'll all have different feelings about which ones are which. That's fine, but you will be more educated as to the strangeness that is happening in 20th century classical composition. Much of what gives you the individuality involved in modern classical composition is how you use dissonance. Dissonance is sort of the key element of this genre. Now, the way that instruments were used, that alone is very unusual. And by saying diverse use of conventional instruments, an example would be John Cage, who would put screws and nails and staplers, erasers, towels, whatever he wanted, in a piano. This is called a prepared piano, and I don't have a grand piano at my disposal, so I can't really imitate it. But the idea is when you put things on the strings of the piano and then play it, it changes the sound. And also because the vibration is making things move, it's almost impossible to write exactly what that sound will be like every time. So that's a definite example of an unconventional way of using the piano. Now, by traditional techniques, we could still use a great deal of dissonance, but our melodies become much more disjunct. So instead of being a nice scalar, we have more of a kind of stuff going on, where it's almost impossible to sing it, kind of impossible to remember that. This kind of goes in with what's in the bottom, but what makes the melodies stand out is more their timbre. A lot of times silence is just as important as notes, but the use of timbres, the use of different instruments, the use of dynamic levels, and how dissonant things can be, those are things that really make traditional instrumental techniques sound very strange. Now, by unconventional instruments, you're going to see some stuff when we study John Cage where you'll definitely get an idea what this is about. But just for an example, an unconventional instrument, well, John Cage has one of his compositions that requires turning 4 radios on without checking to see what stations they were tuned to, all on different stations at different times, and calling that music. It's very weird stuff. Now, as far as the forms and things involved in some classical composition, again, not all of it is going to be weird, but some of it is more followed by a stopwatch than an actual section of a set number of bars. Very strange stuff at times, and the melodies don't necessarily resolve, so there's not a set feeling of, oh, it's got to be this long. There's a lot of rambling going on at times. And tonality is blurred because sometimes 2 or more keys will be being used at the same time. Now, an example of that, I'm going to walk away from my microphone and make an attempt. Here's C major. Here's a key that should sound pretty awful next to a G flat major. Put them together. Okay, I'm not much of a pianist, so that was actually difficult for me, but it sounds pretty weird. That kind of stuff is common, and often you have multiple keys rather than just 2.